Welcome. This is the introduction to the Geography 204. This is the Geography of Hawaii class for this semester, spring 2021. This is a class that we usually teach in the fall. This particular section is technically AP, which I assume that means most everyone in the class is a St. Louis student. If so, welcome to your maybe first Chaminade or university level class. I would also note that if you know of anyone else that's interested in taking this class, not only other students, but faculty or staff, I'm totally open. In fact, would encourage anyone else that wants to sit in the class. They won't be able to get it for credit, but if they want to sit in the class and can engage and help with the discussions and have something to say, hey, the more the merrier. This, as all of our courses are, these are intended to be sort of dynamic and interactive and collaborative learning rather than just sort of talking heads laying stuff out and you guys memorize it and pop it back, especially in a class like this, since there isn't really any sort of realistic textbook in the sort of traditional way. So let me go over what we've got in terms of stuff to go over in terms of readings, and then we'll go into how I actually do the class, because I haven't changed this class at all for the slightly different student body here. There seems like a lot of readings, but they're really not. Your main text is actually Oliveira's book, which is relatively new. I hadn't seen it until last year. Ancestral Places. It's very, very good. There's actually this, and then there's another one by Beamer's. I'm just looking for it here. Beamer's book is actually also quite good, and this one I think is a little closer fit with the class. And the reason that I'm using this one is just simply that I think she does a real good job of talking about the fact that traditional Hawaiian views of place were actually much more integrated into location than what we have now. But they were also tied in many complex ways that we're not sort of familiar with, especially when you might call sort of the Euro-American logic of place, which sort of permeates Hawaii in the 21st century. So rather than going through and, I could easily spend a whole semester on this topic. So I'm going to have you read her book instead. It's a lot faster. She has nice illustrations. It's well done. And I think you'll find it useful. It's also just a valuable resource to keep if you're ever going to get involved in something tied to the ideas of traditional place and traditional identity. So it's a good book. I think you'll enjoy it. The other two actually are sort of unusual. McDonald's and Caselka's is actually a small publication. It's like a pamphlet that a Bishop Museum did way back in the day, or mid 60s. It's basically was designed for a sort of, I think, drive around the island car tour. You'd drive around the island, you'd stop at various places and open the book and then read that particular page or something. It's actually got some really nice pen and ink drawings of places here. It's based on Oahu, so it's an Oahu specific guide. And it's actually very, very well done. It's a very good discussion of a lot of, in a very, easy to consume way, rather sophisticated concepts of geography, geology, volcanology, etc., and how you actually see them on the landscape that we go by and walk around every day here. So I think you'll find that that's also very enjoyable. You're going to get it as a PDF. It's been out of print for, I don't know, 30, 40 years. So I'll send you the link, or I'll just send you the PDF, and then you can pull it up. So it's in your Canvas site. The last is some of the Thrum volumes. I compiled Thrum stuff back years ago, and in I think 2006 or something like that. And basically, George Thrum was an editor. He originally was a printer, so he printed like business cards, wedding invitations, stuff like that. Got into the printing of newspapers, both Hawaiian language newspapers, and later then bought what became I'm not sure if he bought it or started what became what's now the Star Bulletin. And so, he was a newspaper publisher. He also published almanacs, which you can still find these, I think you can still find these like grocery stores and stuff. You'll find the almanac. I think Farmer's Almanac is the one you see. There was, you have to remember, pre-digital, everything you wanted to access had to be in print. And so in the 19th and 20th century, in fact, way before that, 1700s, I think Benjamin Franklin did an almanac in New England back in the mid 1700s. And so what you had was almanacs basically would tell you when the moon's going to rise, when the moon's going to set, what weeks or months were good for planting different crops, and different stuff like that, basically telling you what was going to come up in the rest of the year in a world before TV and digital and weather reports. And so almanacs were something that almost everyone had and everyone needed, because most folks lived off the land. And so when Thrum he's over here, comes over from Australia. His dad's originally from, white British settler, a convict in Australia. They come to Hawaii. His dad works at the waterfront down in the shipyards as a shipwright. Thrum grows up on the waterfront, grows up speaking Hawaiian and English. He was fluent in Hawaiian. In fact, he was a translator for the Kalakaua government. And so he's building these almanacs in the 1870s, trying to figure out ways to sell them. And so he very quickly comes up with a rather clever idea. If you put other things to read as interesting articles in with the almanac, then people are even more likely to buy the almanac because there's other stuff to look at. It's just not like a reference. It's like a dictionary. You actually got stuff that you want to look at in there. And so what happened is more and more of the articles in the almanac became as important as the almanac itself. What he also then would include in what I call the manuals is he would actually have these articles which would basically say, what the buildings were that were torn down, the major events that occurred last year, all the type of stuff, sort of, like what you'd get at like maybe at the start of New Year's now in the newspapers or online where it says, the major events of 2020 or the major events of 2019. That's what he would put in these almanacs. Having said that, so, but on the other hand, of course, these things were thrown away. Because if you've got the 2020 almanac, what do you need with a 2020 almanac in 2021? It's different. So you just toss it. And so these were disposable. And so what happened is they pretty much vanished, as almanacs did pretty much globally, the year after they were out of use. There's very few sets of Thrum's almanacs around. The Chaminade Library has one of the few because the brothers way back in the day went and bound them all together in these huge volumes no one could steal. If you go online to like eBay and stuff like that, you can occasionally find specific years of Thrum's almanacs, and they oftentimes go for over $100-something. And the state library has, I think, one set left. The state archives has one set. UH, as far as I know, has no complete sets of Thrum's almanac. So, on one hand, they were incredibly common, but they vanished almost literally the day after they were done. It's like, how many people have a 2019 calendar lying around? So in that context, what the sad loss is all these articles that he put in the almanac and annual. While many of them were not date specific, a lot of the articles, because of his background as a translator and his relationship with the Hawaiian population, especially the guys on the waterfront and such, very quickly became interested in basically writing articles or having people write articles for him that talked about traditional Hawaiian society, changes in Hawaiian society and such like that. And so they're a fantastic repository of all sorts of interesting material about the way Hawaii was in the way that the 19th century, or that if you want to, the 1880s, saw Hawaii pre-Kamehameha, how Hawaiian society changed from the time of European contact into the late monarchy period. And of course, he went through, he was around writing these things through the collapse of the monarchy and the overthrow, and then the 1898, 1899 takeover by the United States. And so you see all this stuff, but the neat thing about the articles is many of the articles are actually written at the point that they happened. So the article he has that talks about the 1894, 1895 counter-revolution was written 2 weeks after it happened. So you're not seeing something from the standpoint of someone in 2021 writing about what happened in 1880. You're seeing what happened in 1880 from someone that's there in 1880. So they can't sit there and they don't have 100% hindsight in terms of, oh, you guys should have done this. Oh, you guys misunderstood that. You get a much better context for why people made the decisions they made in a period of time when you actually look at what they're writing at that period of time. In the same way that, here it's 2021, the year's just started. We're still in the middle of COVID. It's already pretty clear that we made some really stupid decisions last year in terms of how we're going to deal with the COVID and issues and dealings with federal government, state governments, et cetera, et cetera. But you can't go and say, well, we should have done this with confidence because we're in the middle of it still. 20 to 40 years from now, I can guarantee people are going to write all these, very learned, long articles or books about, the dumb things that people did in 2020 and why couldn't they see this? Well, guess what? You're in the middle of it. You can't see it when you're in the middle of it. And this is the great advantage of a lot of Thrum stuff. One is how the late 19th, early 20th century saw the world that was disappearing, or maybe the world they thought had existed. But also for us, it has tremendous value because it allows us to stand in some place like Waialae Avenue and read the article about, things that are around here and understand, well, that's what it looked like in 1890 to someone in 1890, not from someone in the standpoint of 2021 looking at an old picture, because then the picture was new. So you don't have to read all the Thrums annuals. As you go through the syllabus, you'll actually see a set of the articles. Most of the articles are only a page or two. So you're not really reading a lot of material. But there's just a ton of articles in there, and I think you really enjoy a lot of the other ones that I have listed as recommended. There's a lot of other stuff. They're a fantastic resource. Keep them. And you're only paying, what, $1.99 for a digital thing that's, 200 or 300 pages a pop. So they can't, they can't disappear in terms of the utility. The utility stays the same because they're from the past talking about the past. And that gives them a tremendous value that's different than us looking at the past. So there's some recommended. One is Beamer's, no more cool. The other one is Ingersoll's Waves of Knowing. This is a real interesting one. It might be a little, I wouldn't recommend it per se unless you're really interested in the idea of different ways of viewing the relationships of people and ocean and land. So it's much more specific than I would say most students would want or need. But if that's a particular area that you really resonates with and you want to take a look at that. Mock's book, Developing a Dream Destination, is the classic book that's used when you're talking about Hawaii tourism. And it's still, it's still the main source that people cite. And right now it's the source that people are citing when they're talking about, okay, what is tourism going to be in 2021, 22, and 23? It's Mock's work. They're basically using as their basis. So this is like the reference book on tourism in terms of what it is. And, take it or leave it as whether you think it's a good idea or bad, but that's what it is. So what does this course actually look at? If you notice, it's sort of skewed in here. What we're looking at is the basis of what is geography. Geography is the relationship of people in the land and people in the landscape. And the main thing about this is not only the physical landscape that actually exists, but it's people's perception of the land. And that's where Oliveira's book is so good. Because you have to remember that we make decisions based on what we think is there. We don't actually make, as we'll see, we don't actually make decisions based on what the measurement of what, actually database is actually there. So we make all sorts of decisions that, if you're coming from another time and place, you can sort of scratch your head and go, well, what were you guys thinking? Why did that make sense? And the concept of geography, the relationship of people in the land, people in the landscape, is always dominated by what people see. Not what their eyes see, but what their brain sees, what they cognate, what they think about, what they understand, what they use to make decisions, the choices that they make. Somewhere, by the time we get in the middle of the semester, we'll see this with the current discussion ongoing in terms of flood control, in terms of the Olive watershed, which includes us here in Palolo. Some of the choices are like, they're pretty bizarre. But nonetheless, people are making them because in their view of the world around them, they see this as a logical option. And, hey, I'm not a civil engineer. Maybe they're right. I don't think so, but, they could be. So let's segue into how we do the class. Since for some reason, that's always a fascination to students, how to get a grade. So first are what I use in all my classes. These are what I call critical thinking exercises. These replace what you might think of as tests, midterms and finals, and say, papers. So the critical thinking exercises are based on the material we're going through. So as we go through the first chunk of material, so we're talking initially about, sort of general concepts, geology here in Hawaii, and then Hawaiian landscapes. As we're going through that, keep track of that material, both in the PowerPoints that we're going through, the stuff that you read, the videos that we see. And when you find something that's of interest or something that resonates with you or something that you want to look at in more detail, something maybe that you don't agree with in terms of how it's presented in the class, then that would be what you would want to pick to do your critical thinking exercise. I have a template here in the syllabus that actually says what I'm looking for in the critical thinking exercise, but I'm not going to tell you what to do in terms of what to write about. That's your choice. That's, if you would, that's your kuleana in the material that I'm giving you, which is to look at something in more depth than we're covering it in the class, and that becomes your critical thinking exercises. Now, as we're going through this semester, since you guys are living here in Hawaii, it should be really easy to come up with topics that you want to cover in each of these areas. Some like tourism last semester, some folks just completely off the wall with these long critical thinking pictures, exercises about aspects that they were looking at in terms of tourism. So, some of these you might want to sort of, grab yourself by the back of the head and say, whoa, hold on, let's not make this 300-page paper. But you should have no trouble coming up with something that you want to write about. either tied to the material just directly in class, or the material in class related to your personal experience or things you've seen around you, or your family, family and friends and other type of experiences, or things that you see in terms of, your courses that other courses you're taking, or your potential career that you see. There's all these become motivations to pick something and then do a critical thinking exercise on it. I'll ask you to share with me before you get into it what it is you're going to write on, so that I can tell you if you're looking at something that's going to be like 300 pages. So don't get started, because you're not going to have the time, and I don't want to read it. Usually that's what it is. It's telling you to shrink something down to something more manageable. So that's the major part of your grade. We are going to be doing our Palolo Pukele project. Service learning is the other major part of your assignment. I'm still sketching out exactly what we're going to do. The feedback from last semester, when this class, the same class was doing the material, we were looking at a whole mess of stuff, and it was sort of too broad in spectrum and too broad in choices, and a lot of folks sort of floundered because they just didn't, it was just way too much, and they didn't really have the background to really grasp what was going on. So though it actually turned out to be really useful, because now we have a huge amount of material that you're going to have available to you that they struggled through. So they really sort of broke path, if you would, for a lot of these areas. Right now, I think what we're going to do is we're going to basically have two choices. For those of you that want to do archival, i.e., computer-based or in a chair-based, we have access to almost all of the Mahele, or more accurately, Land Court Award testimonies, on both the native and the foreign testimonies. I think since I now have, and I'll send you the link to this. In fact, you're going to have to use Google Earth. In Google Earth, we actually have our KMZ file, which actually has everything that we've done to date, showing all of the traditional, all the land holdings in the 1850s in both Palolo and also Waititi enlarger. So it's the Waititi Central, or Waikiki, as you now call it. And so what we want to do is actually get the details on those various awards. If someone was given land in the Pukele part of Palolo, what was the testimony they gave? Who were their neighbors? What did they use the properties for? Which, for the as we'll see, for the Land Court Award testimonies, you had to both show where it was, you had to describe who your neighbors were, and you had to say what you were using the land for. That's an enormous resource that's almost never been used here in Hawaii effectively, which is a sort of a criminal shame. So we're going to be using it. So that's going to be one option, is doing that sort of detective work. I'm going to try to sort out the various land claims in sort of maybe an Excel spreadsheet, so that it's going to be more systematic, because trust me that there's like 11 to 13 volumes of testimony, and figuring out where something is in those is like, good luck. So we got to have some systematic way for you guys to struggle through it. It's not going to be, so it's going to be detective work. It's not going to be like pop, it's straightforward. It might be digital, but that doesn't mean it's easy. The second option is going to actually be involved with clearing the dryland area that we've got as the planting areas, in conjunction with your St. Louis faculty. We are developing the agricultural system down there beyond basically just sort of up Melka side of the rifle range. But we're going to be doing more than just clearing it. In the discussions I've been having with our faculty here at Chaminade, what we actually want to look at is both mapping the plants that we have. Now, they're all exotics, and there's some very dangerous ones, including some cactus there. But we want to actually look at the relationship those plants have with each other, and figure out, basically, it would almost like do a biotic map of how these exotic species interrelate with each other, because they are the environment that's there now. We're not sure what that will help us with in terms of information, but we don't want to tear it out and try to go into Hawaiian planting. We want to understand what the land is giving us now, so we can make more sense of how to turn it back into a productive agricultural environment that reflects the past. So those will be the two options. The Insight in-person one, again, I'm toying with 1 or 2 Saturdays a month. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'll have to figure that out. I'll work that out by tomorrow. But I'll let you know as soon as I have that structured in such a way, and I've got to check with your St. Louis faculty to see what they're up to, so we don't stumble all over each other. We're going to be doing that. So that's going to be one option. So if you really want to do classic field work, remember, it's not going to be just clearing, it's going to be also recording and mapping as we then clear. That's going to be option number one. Option number two is look at the Land Court Awards. I would recommend the Land Court Awards simply from the fact that there's a huge demand for people that have the skills to understand how to, one, use the land records, and also basically then compile and collate that for services. There's whole companies here in Hawaii that do nothing but historic land research for law firms, for developers, or for the state. So this, this is an area that not too many people get into, but it's good money. So it's developing a skill set that you might find useful, given what you might see as your potential career. There's going to be a fair number of reaction papers. I do this in all the classes. Basically, what I do is I show a number of videos in the class, and what I do is when I have the video, I'll basically give you a set of questions. Read the question first, then watch the video. What you do then is you then react by answering the questions that I've asked after you've watched the video. And that's the reaction papers. You get graded on doing them. You do not get graded on the content. So don't worry about writing 3 to 5 pages or something like that. But do put some thought into answering the questions that I've asked, because that will tell you why I wanted you to watch that video instead of some other video. So that'll be that structure. We'll probably be doing 1 or 2 learning assignments, which are basically training you in ways to more effectively focus your skill sets in terms of learning more effectively in the same amount of time. But basically the learning reaction papers will be the bigger part of that, and that's small part of the grade. You also have to, in this class, as with some of the other classes, do the Waikiki field trip. I would strongly recommend that you do this virtually. My personal view as a geographer who's, in one way or shape is trained in things like disease vectors, we're the folks that actually do the maps that show where the COVID variants are, is that Waikiki is not a good place to go down into right now. So I would do this virtually. You're going to have to get used to Google Earth. We're going to be using it this semester anyways. And one of the aspects of Google Earth is you can do, if you use the little gold icon, and I'll show you how to do this in class, is you can actually go down to Street View. So you can literally walk through all of Waikiki, or anywhere here in the Hawaiian Islands, virtually in Google Earth. You can walk here on campus in Google Earth. So in that context, I want you to do the field trip, but I would rather that you did it virtually. It's not as good as being able to do it in person, because smelling Waikiki, hearing Waikiki, and seeing Waikiki is a lot different experience than digitally just looking at it on a screen. Having said that, though, I think it's not worth the risk to actually do a Waikiki field trip unless things change radically and everyone's inoculated by, say April or something like that. So the field trip then, and there's again in the field trip, there's actually a description on how to do it further in the syllabus here. And it actually has the things that I want you to look at. And then you write up like a reaction paper, you write up the, a little more detailed, answer to those questions, or, your interpretation of what you saw. And that becomes what you hand in as your field trip, okay? We're gonna be using Zoom. We're gonna be using Zoom the first 2 weeks. I'm not sure the university's planning on people being able to come back to class. I'm a little skeptical of that in the immediate future. So the first 2 weeks, we're gonna do Zoom only. Then as things get more stabilized and we see what, how we fix things, then we'll move back to possibly people being able to be in class or in Zoom. All semester long, you'll have the option of being in Zoom only and not actually, coming to class physically on campus. So that's definitely an option that's available to you. Getting stuff done on time, on schedule, especially the reaction papers, for example, is where your attendance is going to be graded on. So it's not actually physically being in class. Though I do expect you to show up to the Zoom sessions. If you constantly vanish those, you'll get dinged on attendance. So we're going to be in Zoom. Zoom is scheduled for this class from 2:30 to 3:50 on Tuesday, Thursday. So we'll have our first Zoom session on Tuesday. Depending on when you see this, either next week or this week. Let's quickly segue to the schedule. Here's the schedule for the class. If you notice, you got the different modules, and again, you'll see this when you get into the Canvas site. I'm not sure what you guys use in the high school, but here at the university we use Canvas, which is typical in many universities here in the US. And in that, you've actually got the modules are set up, so you pretty much go from top to bottom. And this got the dates that we're going to be covering this stuff. This will be fairly fixed because this is such a squash semester. I don't have the time to go into more detail. So we're going to be skipping over a ton of stuff that we should spend more time on, but we just physically can't. It's just the reality of it. And so this is the topics we're going to be covering in these particular periods of time. And if you notice, you actually got your assignments over here. Please look at, you're going to have the PowerPoints in advance for the material we're going to cover. Please look through the PowerPoints before we do the Zoom sessions. So that way, if there's something you need more explanation on, or if you want to bring up, or maybe you want a clarification, maybe you think there should be interpreted differently, you don't agree with it, then by all means bring it up in class, either verbally, or you can bring it up in chat when we're having class, and we'll go over it. Again, you guys in one way, shape, or form are paying for an educational experience, and just getting through it and getting a grade is really lame. You're not getting your money's worth. Especially at university, it's considered it's a learning experience, and a learning experience is much more beneficial if you're actually mentally engaged, and that involves thinking, Borner's full of nonsense. This is totally bogus. This can't possibly be right. And then bringing up, why do you say that? In that process, you're not only more engaged because you thought of a question and you want to hear an answer, but everyone else in the class in the Zoom session is going to be listening too, because it's very likely a lot of them had the same thought, or they want to hear this dialogue or discussion, because you learn a lot more when you interact than if you're just trying to passively take things up as a sponge. So that's why this is set up this way. We're going to be going over a lot of stuff. A lot of the stuff we cover in this class is controversial. Everything that we do in this class is my interpretation. That doesn't mean it's right. It just means based on my background and what I've learned and what I've seen and what I studied, this is what I think. But it isn't like the writ. It's not like cast in stone. It's just my interpretation. And for a lot of the stuff, there's a ton of different interpretations. And if you don't ask, then I'm just going to assume that for some reason you think I'm really, really smart. If I was really, really smart, I wouldn't be here. I'd be, on CNN or Fox News making a ton of money. So therefore, your input or your questions actually help all of us to get more out of the class, me included. So that's the way the semester looks. I think it's going to be a good semester. It's going to be interesting. It's been a while since I've taught folks in the secondary education system, so it's going to be a learning experience for all of us. Be sure to remember, you've got to have input. Oh, by the way, I will be setting up office hours on Monday and Wednesday from 12:30 to 1:30, where I'm figuring out how to do this where I can send it to everyone as a Zoom open session. So anyone can come in during those times and just sort of ask questions about anything, course related, Chaminade related, non-Chaminade related, I don't care. In the same way that I have an open door policy, and I'm in the office every day too. So I actually do my Zoom and everything from my office here at Chaminade. So, if for some reason you want to come up, then feel free to do that too. But I will set up the Zoom so that you have access to that. I'm not sure how that works with your guys' schedule, but hopefully you can get in if you need to. So with that, I'll see you Tuesday. So take care.